Order June 7th, 2023 at 6:05 PM. First order of business is a pledge of allegiance. Would you join me in the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, first item for discussion, but before we get started, I just want to say that this is not a public hearing. This is just HR Green, Dan Shane from HR Green, educating and answering questions from the board. So, Dan, you're up. Oh, get the mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
But keep going.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Again, my name is Dan Shane with HR Green. I'm the project manager of the Stump Road Improvements Project. I just wanted to take a few minutes here tonight to give you an update on the progress of the project and where we're at from here, and then maybe take a chance to answer any of your questions that you might have. So just real quickly, we're, be pretty blunt about it. We're at the pretty close to the finish line here with the project. It's been a few years that we've been going through this, which is pretty typical for projects that involve federal aid funding. So we are getting pretty close. In fact, just last week, we turned in final draft plans to the city for their review. And I think I think, Tom, you've sent that off to the county for their review as well, for the county road board, as they are a financial partner in this project. And we've already got comments back from them. So we're working on those right now too. I would say within probably next week, we'll send these plans off to MoDOT. Again, they're another one of the financial partners as part of a federal aid project. And ultimately, we'll be seeking their review and approval for the project. By the time we get that, I think we're probably looking at a late fall timeframe in which we would get the final approvals. And then shortly thereafter, we would go to bid at that point in time. So just to put it in perspective, once we bid, there's going to be some utility location work that would have to happen towards the end of this year, we're anticipating, or maybe early 2024. And then basically 2024, come March timeframe, when the weather turns nice, is when the heavy roadway construction would start. And we're anticipating a project like this. It'll be similar to the Hanley Road project. Will be about a year of construction. And when I say a year of construction, I mean a construction season, which would be kind of that March to October, November timeframe. So that in a nutshell is where we're at with the project right now. There's some loose ends that we're still trying to clean up regarding utility coordination. We've been in contact with all the utility companies that are along the corridor, and we're getting plans of adjustment and making provisions for what they need to do to get their facilities out of the way of the roadway construction. And I believe there's still one parcel that we're waiting for right-of-way acquisition approval from too. So once those are in, pretty much those are the last of the pieces that had to fall in place before we get our final approvals. So other than that, we had a couple years ago, I believe it was in 2019, I believe, or 2020, we had a public hearing or a public meeting, and the plans really, for the most part, haven't changed a whole lot since that point in time. Maybe some slightly minor adjustments only to accommodate some of the utility companies, but for the most part, the plans are pretty much identical to what they were back then. So I know there's probably going to be some questions, and I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Hey, board.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you talked about the utility work that needs to be done, and I heard the utility poles were not going to be, there other utility work that needs to be passed? Or do the utility poles, are they going to?
Well, the utility poles will be moved. There's two utility companies out here. There's Quiver River and Ameren. Quiver River is mostly located on the west side of the road, and they're going to be in the direct line of fire with the roadway construction. I've spoke with them, and they've already got a plan put together on where they can move their poles. On the east side of the road, those are the bigger poles. Those are Ameren's. And that's where we made some changes to our original plan to kind of narrow up a lane and the curb to keep those power poles in place without any impact to any lateral adjustments. Now, some of them may have to be adjusted, um, you know, to one side of the pole or another, but nothing significant would push it clear into someone's property or anything like
Any
that.
place for that?
It depends. Like Quivers were all in city right away, so those will be at the expense of Quiver River. Some of the poles that would be required to be moved for Ameren are in a protected easement, so those would be part of the project cost.
And I don't know what we have for you as far as walking through the plan or anything like that, but I'm really interested. One of the questions from the beginning, a couple of years ago,
Mhm.
is how will this impact on the ground, the residents alongside the road? As far as remember at the beginning, there was questions about some resident trees that were right next to the road that would be taken out, things like that. It sounds like completely legal, but just understanding what that impact is. Can you walk us through the street improvement and tell us where things are going to be impactful?
Yeah, so the street improvement is going to consist of a 3-lane roadway section similar to what we see all through Garden Prairie, with curb and gutter. And then just outside of the curb, we'll have a green space and then sidewalk, again, like we see in a lot of places throughout the city. Some of the areas, trying to think here, on the south end, there may be some tree impacts here and there. I mean, it's hard for me to tell exactly where the exact tree impacts are at without having plans in front of me or anything, but I do know that there's a long row of trees on the north end between Feisey and Tucson. One of the things that we were able to do is slide the road over a little bit to avoid all those trees better.
I think the trees in question, the only trees are being that I familiar with are the ones that are acquired as part of this property. I think maybe one on. I think the only trees that are being moved are the ones that are on Miss Pruitt's property, I believe, and then I think maybe on Mr. Ernst. I have.
Those are probably a majority of the trees
Yeah.
that would be removed as part of this
The
project.
trees that were brought up as a concern by the residents multiple times are the trees between Toussaint and Feisey, which are not going to be touched.
That's correct.
There's some down on the highway end and on side on the east corner there, because I walked that with Tim Rich, the owner of Pinecrest Apartments. And he said that he thought when he signed his agreement, that there was a few trees there that were gonna be.
There might be a couple smaller trees.
Yeah, they
in
were
that
smaller
area.
trees, nothing.
Yeah.
Like rentals, but yeah. not-
Yeah,
The trees that people were concerned about were the 75-year-old
Right.
trees that were all along.
And the other big question I had was around storm runoff, everything. We're increasing the impermeable surface. So expecting an increase in water in some way, shape, or form. You walk through what calculations you guys have done, what impact you think that would have, any mitigations you have in the plan for that?
Well, the calculations that we ran resulted in a slight increase over what the existing runoff is today. So there will be a little bit more as a result of the wider pavement through there. And I believe we calculated somewhere to the effect of about 1 CFS more than what is today compared to the 90 CFS that is going into the drain pipe that goes into the creek. So in our opinion, it's a pretty negligible amount that would be impacted, the creek would be impacted by.
Just to be clear, Luke also did the same calculation, got the same calculation, and so did
so
Tom.
the town.
When Tom first got here, Tom also Tom for that. So that calculation's been verified 3 times by a professional engineer.
So one of the questions, maybe you can help me understand this, because we're right now, there's no curbs. Water runs off, it sheds off directly into the grass and
Right.
the ditches down. It would seem like the addition of curbs would at the very least direct that water in certain places. How is that calculated? Is it just saying overall there'll be 1% increase? Or could that increase be greater at some areas because it's directing down?
It takes all that into account. So at the point of effluence at the end of the pipe, that's where it was coming up as 1 CFS more. But you're correct, with the curb and gutter, the runoff that was going into a ditch or just kind of overrun flowing will be collected either through the curb into an enclosed storm drainage system.
So what's the existing, how many CFS existing?
I thought it was around 90.
Okay.
Going into the creek there.
Dan, can you explain some of the improvements that the curb and gutter and storm sewer will make on some properties that currently are experiencing some erosion?
Yeah, some of the properties, the way the ditches are set up right now, and it's pretty common from what we see on an unimproved roadways, is there'll be a ditch and then all of a sudden it just daylights into someone's property. It's kind of sheep flows across their yard. What this will do is capture all that runoff into that curb and into an enclosed system. So, you're really, some of those areas that we're seeing runoff run across their yard and kind of create problems down in their property, won't see that anymore.
That doesn't, here's where I'm having a hard time understanding that is if it will keep water from going to those other yards and things, how is the outlet in that single pipe change? If it's capturing all that and it's all going in there instead of running off in random directions, how is?
Well, it's not unchanged. There is a little bit more runoff. Yeah.
But it would seem like, doing the math, it would seem like 1 CFS along the entirety of the road gets lost and you're just capturing that 1 extra CFS and bringing it down. That wouldn't make much of an impact.
Well, some of that runoff is already bypassed the culvert outflow
Okay.
because it's running through people's property into the same creek. It's going to the same
Mhm.
watershed.
But we would now be capturing that took the other
Right.
paths and it would go out the pipe
Yeah.
instead, right?
And all the pipes have been sized appropriately to handle that flow.
But capturing all of that that's escaping in alternate paths and coming through the pipe, that only equals 1 CFS?
Where will,
I mean, this isn't, every property doesn't have that scenario. I can only think
I
of
hear
maybe one, but
where will those storm sewers empty? That are
Into
on
that
the
current
east
creek.
side,
into the current creek.
and how far back down the creek will they go?
So Dave, there's a large pipes that are under the road now. Those are going to be extended. The new pipe system will be connecting into that low spot where it's not a box culvert, it's I believe dual pipes.
It's an oval pipe.
Oval pipe system that's gonna be extended. We've asked them in previous meetings to do as much as they can downstream, and they're doing that with some additional riprap all the way as far as, I believe it's about 90 feet for that easement that allows for more rock and riprap
On
downstream.
both sides of the creek?
On the downstream side.
On the
creek.
down.
On the upstream side of the creek is basically all the swale. See, because right now the roadside swales are why the water doesn't change much, because all the roadside swales on both capture most of the water that's there now, other than a few properties that it's sheet flowing past. But keep in mind too, you have 2 large detention basins that are currently funneling in onto the west side and then going under those oval pipes. So that's a significant amount of water from the detention from Whistling Pines, the commercial developments up, the Quick Trip on that west side. That's a large amount of
Yeah.
water that remains unchanged.
Pinnacle Point also? The other side of Bryan?
There might,
I thought there was something on the other side.
Little bit. little bit, but it's mostly the commercial, Whispering Pine, the commercial. I don't think too much for Pinnacle, because most of Pinnacle will go towards kind of the northerly.
So that's all dumping or most of it is currently dumping at that one.
And there's
point.
two very large detention basins and two very large outfall pipes that currently go to this area under the road. Both sides, the roadside ditches currently go to the road. So there's that amount of water it's just not being collected by curb and gutter, it's being collected by roadside swales. So cleaning up the curb, gutter, adding the storm sewer, it defines it more, but it's ultimately still going to that downstream portion, just downstream or at the low spot where it is.
Where the creek is.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
And-
those pipes, again, how far down from the road will those empty?
Oh, it's just right,
20,
maybe
15, 20.
10 or 15 feet
Yeah.
from where they are today.
Correct.
And then
Yeah.
it will rip wrap on both sides?
Yep.
And their original plans only called for maybe 15 or 20 feet. We've asked them to go for as far as we think we can go within the easement that exists for drainage. I want to say it was about a 90-foot easement.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there. Wherever that easement limit is where they're extending the additional riprap and trying to clean up that downstream side.
So that'll help with erosion through there and it'll also help with the velocity of the water coming out of that pipe.
Help stop the erosion or?
It'll
Yeah.
it'll help prevent erosion.
So it's gonna help people that's it's by that are really experiencing a lot of problems currently.
Well, that would be further downstream.
Steal Joel's thunder, but he's the
Yeah,
first
you
lot,
the first.
Yeah.
and he's going to be that extra 1%.
Well, we're not doing anything to the creek, next to his property. That, there's an easement that we have to stay within. So we stayed within that easement. We tried to do everything we can with the riprap to help control, either the velocity or to keep it from eroding through there as much as we can.
So as part of this project, as part of the MoDOT project, we have to stay within the scope. So Tom and I've discussed before, and we've discussed with Joel, obviously, as we get to this point, if there's additional work that we can do, that's gonna have to come out of it. Stormwater money the city has, and it's gonna have to, we have to have a discussion about additional drainage issues. But it wouldn't be work done in conjunction with this project as part of the project because we can only work within the bounds of the original project for that. But Tom and I are well aware that there's want to try to see what we can do, how far we can take this project, and then what is still left over that may need. So,
Will that be addressed at the same time this is going on? I mean, because if it starts going bad, the residents, that's not gonna be pretty.
Yeah, well, as of right now, that would be outside of the scope of what this project was set up for. But I mean, that's something that's, the city can monitor.
Where you were discussing the sidewalks, it sounds like there's grass, then sidewalk, then who's gonna be responsible for cutting that grass?
Well, that's always a good question. I mean, technically that is on city property. And it would fall under their jurisdiction to maintain. However, a lot of people, property owners that live next to it, they choose to maintain it on their own, but there's nothing that forces them to have to maintain it. And it would fall on the city.
There's no way to put the sidewalk right next to the street like it's done on Fizey, one side of Fizey. So, because you're asking people who are vehemently opposed to the 3 lanes, you therefore go down and maintain that slice of grass.
Yeah, so only in certain circumstances is that considered. And when it is, we have to make the sidewalk wider. So we're really not gaining a whole lot. in terms
Except for
of
you don't have to maintain that slab of grass.
well, yes. Yeah.
close it now.
Sorry.
Well, I know our subdivision, we pay to have somebody mow that area because if the city does mow it, they don't mow it very often.
Yeah, or if you contract through the county or whoever does it, I don't know.
they address, at one point in time, they were talking about vinyl fences along the sidewalk to keep people walking around in neighbors' backyards and such. We talked about a vinyl fence at one time, but I don't know if that's something that is in the plans. It'd really be nice to be able to.
Yeah,
with you.
there isn't any provisions for new fence that isn't currently there. Now, if typically on a project, if our slope limits get into an existing fence, it would be the agency's responsibility to put something back in.
Yeah, I had a Whispering Pine resident ask me.
But yeah, and I understand that question, but we're not impacting any of their fence. So that their fence will remain.
So it goes out for bid.
Well, I have a engineer's estimate. So
Is it contemporaneous costs? Is it more,
But those are weird.
pardon me,
is it not from 2 years ago or is it more current?
it's from last week.
Oh, yeah. Well, that would be good to have.
Yeah.
How could we get a copy of that? How could the
You
rest-
already do have a copy.
we do? Oh, we do?
We can,
Okay.
we can, send that out. We sent it out to, sent all of that to St. Charles County Road Board for their review, but, we can put our, engineer's estimate out as well.
And there was no downstream study or those kind of impact studies done, correct?
Or the creek, no.
And the sidewalk that's going up to Highway N, I mean, do we know that there's plans for Highway N to do any sort of,
No, that segment of sidewalk was removed. So the sidewalk will only go from Sancho's to Fizey. And then on the west side of the road, it'll go from Whispering Pines to Fizey.
so it won't go from, oh, that's,
No.
that's.
It doesn't connect anything, and MoDOT has no intentions of turning highway into a pedestrian route.
I think that's all I have. I appreciate the information. for the
Problem.
residents.
Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Back to the storm. Anything south of it, how does that map down? Period slower.
So basically, from about where the Pinecrest apartments are at to the north, all that continues to flow in the same direction as what it does today. So we're not really changing the size of the drainage area.
Okay.
So everything still flow, like wherever it flows going into the creek today is what will happen with the project. And then from Sancho's, it'll flow back towards highway.
So is it from?
Yeah.
From Sancho's to Fizey, is like a bowl kind of?
Yes, yep. Yeah, the creek is the low point of the whole project.
Down towards. Got it. That makes sense.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, Joel, do you have any questions?
No, Dave,
I want to ask,
Dave.
I'm asking Joel.
No, you're out of order.
I'm so.
Hey, you were out of order. He can ask questions after the meeting. You have no right to ask questions for anyone in the audience to ask questions. You have no right.
Since when?
Since right now with this meeting, you have,
Joel, do you have any questions? Thank you.
so,
I don't want to get you.
Thank you. Don't worry about that. Thank you.
you have,
I think that the alderman can request comment or ask a resident to come up or a speaker to come up.
We can request you one, it's up to the chair if they want to grant it.
you want to address that, John?
We should probably talk about that just in the rules of order. Yeah. The topic of conversation for that.
Okay, like I said before, this is not a public hearing. It's not public comments. It was to address the board's questions. We can do this at a different time. Individual board members do not have the right to call someone up to speak. Any other questions to Dan?
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay.
Can I just follow up with the copy of the current estimate? You said that's gonna be forthcoming, right?
Yep,
We should have
I can send it out to everybody.
Okay, right.
One of the things that wasn't brought up this evening, but one of the things that has been discussed is the potential for having alternate bid. This is something we'll probably talk about. We can do this and then the board can decide later if it wants to go this route, but we did discuss potentially doing an alternate bid on the RFP where a bidder could bid to do the road in asphalt versus concrete to save money. That could be something we discuss at a later date, depending on how good the bids come in for that. But that's a conversation that we've also been having, so it's kind of changed a little bit. It may change a little bit of what the estimate is, but we can send out the preliminary estimate and then also try to get an idea of what we think an alternate bid might be if we put it in concrete curbs, gutters, but an asphalt driving surface. We've also been discussing. So once we get that all together for you as well, we'll make sure we get that information out to the board. So this was just, again, an idea that came up late in the game because we looked at possibilities of saving additional money. So, but we will follow back up with the board with on that. So,
Okay, I have a couple of questions to follow that up. Are we talking a 3-lane road from start to finish?
Yes.
And why could it not be narrowed in places where there's no turn lanes?
Yeah, we did look at narrowing it in places, but by the time you add turn lanes at Whispering Pines and Tucson and Sancho's, the curb line would be weaving in and out, and then it becomes kind of a constructability issue where it becomes more expensive to construct it that way. So that was one of the reasons we're keeping a continuous 3-lane section, just because of the close spacing of the driveway or side streets.
And then is there a traffic count that would determine whether it should be concrete versus asphalt? And I go back because I live close to where Tom was. There's Kisker's concrete all the way, then go down asphalt all the way. Car count is less on one.
Well, typically, car count is not the driving force on that, Dave. Because concrete, asphalt can be made thicker to offset additional. I mean, we have highways made of asphalt, as well as concrete. We were looking at that as an alternate, just because some of the current pricing on asphalt has been coming in better than concrete. So we do have roads around town. Bates Road is one that was constructed with concrete curb and gutter and has the asphalt middle. So we're looking at that because there could be some significant savings, maybe not. The reason why we're thinking about bidding it as an alternate, we would then be able to decide. So based on cost and whether or not, if the cost difference between the potentially lower price asphalt is not significant, the city may decide to keep the concrete. There's pros and cons, as we all know, with concrete and asphalt. Concrete, everybody says you don't have to touch concrete. We all know that that's not really that true these days. We're Fluor, FISE. I mean, we have significant roads that were built with heavy duty concrete that still have a lot of cracks. So from that aspect, repairing concrete is more expensive, and it's always a trade-off. So asphalt, you can repair the whole street in one whack, maybe for the same price than just doing isolated slab repairs like we're facing on some of our roads as we speak now. So just like, for instance, an example, Town Square is concrete curb and gutter with asphalt. We've got the federal grant. We're gonna do the whole thing. We're gonna mill, overlay. If that was all built in concrete and we had to replace a third of the slabs on Town Square, they would far exceed the cost of what we're doing for a mill and overlay on Town Square. So those are some of the trade-offs and why we've started those discussions, because of the higher prices that everyone in the county has been getting on all their concrete road bids. And so we brought that up as a potential idea to maybe reduce the amount of the overage over the grant as a thought, and we will get that approved through Dan and through MoDOT to allow us to bid those alternates if that's what we all decide to do. I recommend that we do that to see if we can bring down the overage that everybody's been experiencing. Because as you all know, anything that's over and above the allotted grant amount, we can go to the road board and request, but that there's no guarantee that they're going to fund that. We would likely have to share in whatever those overages would be.
I talked to the road board and they told me that our best case scenario would be, they have the funds that they could do half the cost over. They said the city would be responsible for the other half, possibly be responsible for 100% of it if the funds aren't there.
You're correct.
Can I just verify again about the sidewalks? I want to make sure that going towards N on both sides, on Whispering Pine side and by the apartments, there are no sidewalks that are abutting to N.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So from on the Whispering Pine side, that's where the sidewalk ends.
Right at the
Coming from
beginning of the
Visey.
division, down to that other side.
Right. And then the side, on the other side, it goes to Sancho or to the apartments. And that's it.
Right, on both sides. Okay, that's.
I have one more follow-up question. We'll ask you as many questions as you're willing to stand there. Think of some new ones.
All right. I will sit down after this question.
So the question about whether we could move it to 2 lanes to 3 lanes, and I think that's a good reason, not having the edges wave in and out. Has there been any discussion about doing something else with that unused middle lane, like putting in a planter or some beautification or something like that? Thought being it would also act as a more natural speed instead of making it a strip.
Yeah. I mean, nothing has been brought up at this point. That obviously would add cost to the project.
And you would also have probably long-term maintenance on that, Mike, and how do you keep whatever plantings in there watered, maintained?
James.
Boys retirement.
Yeah, I'll take care of it.
And really, unless you really narrow the lanes around whatever island, it's not gonna slow people down. The really thing that would slow people down is change of direction, either vertically or horizontal.
When we talked, this actually came up when Tom first came on board and we discussed the cost and maintenance and everything versus Tom's point, whether or not it's gonna have much impact. The thought was it's gonna have negligible impact for the concern of speeding versus potentially significant additional costs and maintenance, future maintenance. That being said, we did talk about what things we could do. Those unfortunately are just really
Yeah, I mean, you know,
not
people
really
are putting in,
this project.
Financially.
people are
Well,
putting
like-
in things like speed
We probably
tables.
have been in that.
So main reason for saying it is beautification. It's the
Glorified speed bump.
yeah, so having that wide of a lane that far, three lanes wide up that, it seems like a perfect action. So something to break up at least the sidelines or something, and I think it would look good, but don't want to belabor that.
And there's other things, ultimately for things like that, there are optical things that we can talk about and look at doing, from crosswalks to Tom and I've worked on these things before. I mean, there are things that you can heat on the ground that will help. There are, again, how much, if somebody just wants to not pay attention, just drive fast, short of putting a speed bump there or a roundabout in the middle of something, not gonna slow them down. But the casual speeder who's not realizing, oh shoot, I'm going a little too fast, there are lots of things we can do, really low impact that might be able to get away with. But I mean, I think like the guys who just want to be a jerk and floor it down the road, Tom's point, without getting them to change direction, they're not gonna see us. That's,
Yeah, you also have to be careful, Mike, where you put some of those islands and things, because you have limitations because of the different entrances, so you obviously can't put certain things in front of those entrances, and we still have a few driveways that are on, especially on the east side, that are actually directly accessed, since you couldn't put anything there, but, I guess what we could do in the future, or near future, is look at some things. The problem with speed tables, which is probably the most cost-effective way to slow people down, fire districts not like that. But some cities that we represent are still moving forward with speed tables. Certain communities, you're basically just telling the fire district to deal with it, but because
This is Alderman Whitman. I'm sorry, and forgive me for interrupting. What's a speed table?
It's a
speed bump.
It's a longer version of a speed bump. It's a
Okay, got it. Thank you.
more fire truck friendly version of a speed
More
bump.
gradual.
It's
Right.
gradual.
And there's typically more than one.
Correct.
Have you ever been in Woodland Sports Park?
Don't think so. I think I've seen these before though. That makes sense. So it's a less violent speed bump.
Good arrow.
Yeah, you can still get air.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you allowing me to tell you about the project some more and give you an update. I don't want to take all of your time before your board.
Right. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Next item for discussion is procedural rules for meeting and the Board of Aldermen. Hey, Mike, I think, was that your initiative?
Yeah, so I wanted to start with a discussion about this. We got that back on Friday, so I've still been digging through it a little bit, but not on it.
No. I mean, this is something, this is something that Don Young and I brought up some time ago that we needed to.
Yeah. I think it's been a discussion for quite a while, so there've been a lot of people that have talked about it, but either way, we got the draft back, the proposal back. I do think that we need a little more time to mull it over, so I wouldn't vote on it tonight.
But maybe we should have our city attorney maybe talk a little bit
Yeah.
about what
Sure
the
thing.
draft, we'll draft it up here a little bit.
So again, what I've presented to you is just a draft for concept for further discussion. A lot of it is just formalizing some of the procedures that I've observed over the last 20 years here and putting them in words. Some of it is providing greater clarity to things that have kind of been done over the years, but have never been followed or to a T or were never vocalized as a procedure. And some of it's just recommendations of things to consider. I will draw your attention to a couple of items that have been topics of discussion that we've had that I've included in here for clarification. So one is, we generally adopt Robert's Rules of Order in this ordinance. We've always generally followed it, but we've never formally adopted it. The one catch with Robert's Rules of Order is it doesn't envision compliance with the Sunshine Law. So we do have to build in certain Sunshine Law concepts into our overall procedures to fill in those gaps. So a couple of those items, for example, I did put in here a motion to reconsider, specific to the city. So it'd be more specific than Robert's Rules, so it would supersede the general motion to reconsider under Robert's Rules. But otherwise, Robert's Rules would apply.
Can I ask you what you mean by that, more specific than Robert's Rules?
Well, Robert's Rules again so we generally adopt Robert's Rules. If we have an ordinance or a specific section that addresses something that is also addressed in Robert's Rules, the thing we address in our code is going to prevail, to the extent there's any conflict.
There's some of these items, A through E, that would be more specific than Robert's rules. Is that what you're saying?
They are not addressed generally. in
Oh, they're
Robert's
not
rules.
addressed
That's why
in
we've
Robert's-
added them.
Okay.
Yes. And a lot of the rationale behind the items that we've added are actual rights issues, constitutional takings issues, due process issues. A lot of things go into the thought process of adding them. It's not just throwing words on paper. I did provide for a procedure for the introduction of bills, which we've never had before. So that is something new. That, I've formalized the public
John, just one thing I want to make sure that John did mention, because you do have, you have some procedures that had been previously adopted by resolution as far as the RBAs, and John did adopt that into this.
Correct.
There's not a wholesale change of how this is done.
That is
Has
correct.
been sound.
That is correct. We did have a resolution adopted many years ago and amended several times, so it was added in here, and then we just filled in some of the gaps that didn't exist, that we realized existed in that process. But the city did have a process. It wasn't always followed, but we did have a process. Added formally our public comment procedures. Did add a response process consistent with some conversations I've had with individual council members. Added specific language on procedures for public hearings, and then also procedures for enforcement of decorum.
Can I ask a question about the decorum?
Yes.
Is that, you're saying other cities have that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But the language is kind of vague. It's talking about if somebody becomes an annoyance. That's not like somebody talks more than 3 minutes. That's kind of an ambiguous and arbitrary, kind of like, I might find something annoying that maybe Dave doesn't.
Well, in terms of the context of it, this comes out of language out of cases that talks about when someone can be removed from the meeting without violating. And it's not being annoying, being an annoyance, meaning, for example, if they are speaking up for 3 minutes, that is a basis, because they're disrupting the meeting by not following the rules of the meeting, or yelling out, or doing things that are inappropriate in a business meeting. But yeah, it is based on a case now, discussing the subject matter.
This is Alderman Whitman, and kind of in light of that, in a lot of legal documents, provisions and, or what do you call it? They have definitions that sort of outline what some of those, terms might mean, and that's kind of a specific term. Is there any legal document that might refer to what that would entail? Like, to be more specific?
We haven't defined the term for purposes of this, and I would caution being too overly specific. Because it's difficult to define that, but courts have recognized it as being appropriate. Under certain circumstances, obviously, it's kind of like definitions from the Supreme Court of other things that we don't define, which is when you see it.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And I will say there's the catch-all here is the language that says or otherwise seeks to or does disrupt the orderly process of the meeting. So there is a qualifying language. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, don't have to adopt all of this. Can adopt all or more. I just want to present to you various concepts that I'm familiar with in other cities and just from this other city.
So who determines who's annoying? Is it one person? Is it the board? Is it a board of aldermen? Is it the mayor?
Pursuant to the code provision that I've drafted, it's the mayor's prerogative as the chair of the meeting, or the board can make that decision without them as a body.
So it's one person decides if somebody's annoying.
Not annoying, an annoyance that
An
disrupts the
annoyance.
order of the meeting.
You are.
Which is very typical to have the chair have authority, and that's consistent with Robert's rules as well.
I'm sure I would have been found annoying when I was making comments out there.
Again, I do want
I
to.
know annoyance, I know, yeah, I
But,
get it.
and again, disrupts or alters the ability to conduct a meeting. And again, in terms of removal, that is last straw, situation. And it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I've had it happen in meetings I've been to. Not here. but
Multiple
on
people
many
getting,
meetings.
multiple people getting removed from meetings.
Oh, sure.
Get ahead with it.
Always in front, not behind.
So they're getting arrested or they're not getting arrested? They're just being forcibly removed?
Just being removed from the meeting. Now, obviously, it depends on context, but generally it's being removed.
I find it very ambiguous.
Want to make a note, in E under quorum 4 makes reference to subsection C 2, 3, and 4. I think that might have been.
It's been corrected.
There you go. Awesome. Okay, so a couple of notes that I had taken on this, some things that I'd like to see. We don't have a lot of time, but we can discuss them. Based on the conversation earlier, procedure for allowing or inviting up an alderman, inviting up a resident to speak or bringing forward a witness in either a workshop or a regular meeting. I'd love to explore how that can be done in an equitable way.
Robert's rules of order would allow. Robert's rules allow you to. Body.
Well, and before we get to that, there's a lot that goes into that concept, and I'd like to talk to you offline about it.
It's good.
Okay, so let me get that straight. So I'm out of order. But the next time something like this happens, that the mayor has to ask somebody a question, it's out of order too, then, is that correct?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that analysis, and I'd
Okay,
like to talk to you
exactly.
offline on it.
Exactly. Just so we're clear.
Another item that I'd like to see, and I don't know if this is covered in Robert's rules, you tell me, because I bought the book. I'm 3 pages in.
I immediately fell asleep, I'm sure.
It's been the last 2 nights. It's been great. 1 page and you're out.
You'll sleep great all year.
Exactly.
Did you make sure you got the 11th edition Public Affairs 2020? Otherwise, it means nothing.
Jokes aside on that,
Start all over.
the reason I do that is if you just say Robert's rules without specifying the publisher, I actually had an incident where someone had a different version and the answer was different.
What's the most current? I thought it's the 12th most current.
The most current one I've got, which is
Because I have the exact same book you have. So if you're using that book, we're good.
the 12th, yes, that is the most current,
So we want to use the 12th to the 11th.
right? 11th in here?
I would like to use the one that John's going to reach to.
It should be the 12th. And I'm sorry, that's just a type, that's a typographical error. Thank you for catching it. It should say 12th.
Okay,
I just want to use the same one that you're going to reach to at some point.
that's wise.
Everything on it's right, including the year, except for the reference, so I apologize.
So in the language here, it mentions being the path for the alderman to place something on the agenda, but it only says the workshop. It doesn't say the regular agenda. Regular meeting. Is that covered in Robert's rules? It's how to get that there and preserve the language in that.
It's not, and that's why we've added it. And so the concept is, and I've seen this operated in different cities, and I think it's an effective way of doing things. But again, open to your all's discussion and decision
Mhm.
is because remember that to put something on a work session agenda requires less than a quorum, less than a majority of the vote. Okay, so the concept is that there's a discussion conceptually about it at a work session, and then you would vote whether or not it should be put on a regular meeting for actual action. That's the idea behind it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that there are some situations where that wouldn't be covered under the emergency clause that's in there that are still time sensitive. It applies to be put directly on the regular meeting in those circumstances, because whenever it gets there, vote it down just as easy, unless there's another reason. Tell me, if there's a reason not to do that. And then I'm big on checks and balances. So whenever we talk about something like someone becoming an annoyance, being expelled from the meeting, also having procedures where that can be overturned by majority vote of the board or something like that, just to make sure we have.
That's covered in our rules.
Perfect. Page 5 by the weekend, so.
Any other discussion? Move on to the next item of discussion. Amending occupancy inspections.
We have this on the agenda this evening, as was requested from the last work session. I put this on here just to make sure that there was nothing additional. I know there had been some conversations after the meeting. And there was some information provided boards at the training session, which I think some, but not all of you were able to go to, about the number of occupancy permits, occupancy inspections that we do, and the failure rate, which was about a third on the first inspection. So I just wanted to make sure, and then I know Alderman Costello, who requested this bill, had originally made some comments to me about potential changes. I just wanted to make sure that no additional conversation or amendments before moving forward with the legislation before you tonight for general meeting. I'll just leave that of you. And I know our building commission would like to speak as well.
Yeah, at the last meeting, there was some real estate agents that were here complaining about the occupancy inspections and, you know, and I listened to what they said. You know, I've been doing these things for over 15 years. And, you know, the sellers aren't complaining about that. I've had a few, maybe I'd say all of them I had that were discontented about having to have this inspection done. You could count on one hand. So I very seldom get that. And the buyers, they don't complain about it. You know, why would they complain if something was done to make the house safer when they moved in? And all that we're doing is we're making the house as safe as it was when it was built. We're not going retroactive. You know, the real estate agents, they had, you know, they had some spin on that. You know, they were saying, well, it's a hardship to the seller because they have to get it done. And it is a little bit of an inconvenience for them. And that's mainly the ones that do it. But they're not complaining about it. They understand it. And a lot of the stuff that I make them fix is stuff that they did and did it wrong. You know, some wiring issues or something like that. And then I explained to them what they did wrong and why they need to fix it. And they happily do it. But, you know, they were talking about the inconvenience. Well, I know Alderman Johnson said, what if we did it for nothing? And that wasn't good enough either because they still had to fix it. And there was a little bit of conversation. So if they getting their own inspection done, the buyer, and what if we had to make sure that got fixed before they moved in? Well, I didn't want to do that either because then it had to be re-inspected. So the bottom line here is the real estate agents, they don't like these things and they're trying to get rid of them everywhere they can because it's an inconvenience for them. And I get it. They're busy. They got a lot of things to do. And once in a while, most of the times they don't even get involved in it. It's the seller. Sometimes it's the buyer if it's a short sale or a foreclosure, but sometimes the real estate agent has to get involved if the seller's out of town. They don't want to have to do it. It's a pain in the butt for them. And I get it. They're busy men and women. But here's the bottom line, short, without any spin. who you want to look out for. Not inconvenience the real estate agent once in a while, are looking out for the people that are moving into our city, that are going to be residents here, to make sure their home is as safe as it was when it was built. That's the bottom line. So it's who you want to look out for, real estate agents or citizens. Up to you. That's what you're going to be voting on. Any questions? I'll be happily to answer.
Jeff, I do want to thank you and Terry. I know that earlier today we had a resident call and they were trying to close, I think, by Friday, and able to squeezing in an action for them. You know, it's unfortunate. It hasn't happened a lot, but it sounds like all indications, our staff is very accommodating, even when they don't give us.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'd say probably more than any city in St. Charles County. Anyway, we're most accommodating, because I do these things after 5 o'clock every week, damn. And I've even gone back and done re-inspections on weekends for them. We don't charge them for these re-inspections. I go back and do them on Saturday. You know, I've done them I did one last week. I flunked it. They got it fixed the same day. It was like 6 o'clock in the evening. I went back and passed it. I re-inspected it. So I mean, I bend over backwards to make sure these things get done. I'll be honest with you, if this is my least favorite inspections or occupancies, because they're a pain for me too, a lot more than they are for the real estate agent. But I see the merit in these things, because there are some things that are life safety issues that I catch and I make them fix. And if they don't do them and their inspector they just negotiate it off the selling price. Maybe it gets fixed, maybe it doesn't. But it's just to keep the houses in our city as safe as we can. And I think it's a good thing for that reason. But yeah, it's not like it's a big money maker for the city. You know, by the time you look at I mean, my time and time and all the clerical work that goes involved with these things, keeping track of them. It's not a big money maker. We charge $75 for an inspection, nothing for a re-inspection. And I've been back on them, some of them as many as 4 times, where the homeowner's trying to fix stuff. I've run into them where finally I fix the damn thing because I get tired of coming back, and I did one last week, and the guy was Chinese, and I'm trying to explain to him how to put this GFI in. And I'm thinking, this ain't working. He had one, but I'm trying to explain to him how to hook it up. I just went and put the damn thing in. I says, it's going to save me time and him time. And I put it in myself. Tested it. It worked fine. I don't know any other city that does that kind of stuff, but I'll bend over backwards to try and help these people out. So we're probably as far as occupancy inspections, we probably are the least intrusive to people, of any city that I can name, because there's not too many inspectors that will do what I do.
Appreciate it, Jeff.
Well, I'll probably be here longer than you will. I've seen boards and aldermen all go, and it, well, then maybe you might want to look at the thing. At that time, but here's the way I'm looking at this job that I'm doing. I've been doing this for over 15 years. And before that, I chaired the Planning and Zoning Commission for over 20 years. I mean, I've been with the city since it began. And I don't figure I'll retire. I thought maybe I'd retire at 75. Well, I'm going on 74. I'm not going to retire at 75. I told Dave Zucker, he asked me when I turned 65 if I was going to retire. And I said, Dave, as long as I can go up and down stairs without getting winded, climb a ladder when I need to, once in a while, I said, I'm good. I said, hell, if I retire, my wife will work me to death. I come to work to rest. I mean, I don't take vacation days, hardly any of those. I've taken a couple of sick days since I've been here.
In the interest of time, we need to move on.
Okay. Well, don't ask me any more questions.
Just so Alderman Johnson knows, there are most of the community occupancy rental property. Charles County, which is not a lot of rental properties, but Ottawa who and they either. So yeah, I mean, they're still a practice. And this bill does not even give all homes, it's just for non-owner occupied. If Jeff stays or goes, somebody's gonna have to properties which have been done.
I did want to clarify, James had mentioned some comments about changes that I brought up. I wanted to clarify that. I don't think it changes anything with our vote tonight, but thought being carrot versus stick. Still making these available, making them available for free. I think it's a great idea. But including that in some kind of welcome packet, when people move into Darden Prairie, what do they get? Do they just thinking they live in O'Fallon? We could send out a welcome packet from the city and say, hey, or complimentary occupancy permit or a safety inspection or something like that. And you end up with more people doing it, I think, but they're happier about it and they feel like they're getting a service from the city that's elective and they're getting a bonus for living in Darden Prairie, not a new requirement. I think we changed the way that it's worded and make it elective. We can turn it into something that's really good.
As a resident, but it's not the residents now are complaining about it, it's an industry, it's the realtors industry.
I've heard
Complaining about this.
I've heard new homeowners complain about it as well, which I also.
But we deal with every new homeowner,
That
and we don't really get that many.
It probably doesn't rise to that level that they complain, but they'll sit around with friends and go, it pissed me off, I had to do this. Which that's not what they complained about. They complained that they had to take off of work or they had to pay the extra fee when they've already paid for it and all that. But yes. And the other part is I have questions about how many of those are captured, because I know whenever I bought my house in Darden Prairie, I guess we flew under the radar and we didn't get an inspection. So I'm wondering how much they get. But I know we're over time, so I'll make that my last comment.
You're not a legal resident of Darden Prairie? Is that what you just told us?
City doesn't.
Let's move on. We're running past, let's move on. Staff communications, city attorney,
I have nothing, Mayor.
city engineer.
Yes, sir. Just briefly, the highlights. We are working on the Henning Road TAP grant. We presented and made a case for funding of Hanley Road for construction to the road board. And those are kind of the highlights. Of course, we've got some plan reviews that are ready for the next week's P&Z meeting. Those are kind of the highlights, unless there's some questions.
Alderman? I have nothing to add. A motion to adjourn, entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second, all in favor?
Right.
Okay, the work session is adjourned. We're gonna take a 5-minute break. Get back and we'll start the regular meeting.